Good evening, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called Macduff Lives, and tonight we're continuing our Friday night series of interesting interviews with folks associated with the LaRouche Organization and the Schiller Institute. And tonight it's my great pleasure to welcome to the show Diane Sare. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you.
So glad to have you with us. And there's an awful lot we have in common. First of all, you and I both have some history of playing trombone. I don't think I went as far as you did with it, but those of us that play the old plumbing, have a kind of a brotherhood or a sisterhood of whatever you want to call it, and always the thrill of playing that great trombone music from the classical repertoire. I'm sure you still playing your trombone, Diane?
Yes, pretty regularly. Maybe we should do a show. We can play duets. That'll attract a lot of people.
Your side would. I'm not sure about mine. My lip's a little bit out of shape, but it's a pleasure to talk to you, and a fellow musician. But more importantly, you're somebody who's taken up the political sword, I guess is one way to put it. You are challenging Senator Chuck Schumer for the Senate seat from New York. And bravo to you for that. Brava, maybe I should say. Happy to know you. And I don't know what you're for, but I'm for you. if we can defeat Chuck Schumer, I'm going to call my life complete. That would be a fantastic victory. But let's start with some of your other adventures. You have been very active in the Schiller and LaRouche Organization for a long time. One of the things that we talked about in our little preparatory talk was we were talking about what's going on around the world with regard to the fate of children. And one of the things that you said right off the bat was let's look at it this way: the children of Yemen are being treated horribly with U.S. sanctions, and not just that, but everything that's happening to them are certainly avoidable horrors to happen to any child. But then you said, look at the policy toward the children in the United States, and it is the same policy. We are neglecting children all around the world, whether we are in our own so-called sovereign country, or whether we are around across the other side of the world trying to somehow instill democracy in the most grotesque manner possible. Talk to us about your work with regard to alleviating the plight of children in this country and around the world.
Well, I think we've come to this point because of something LaRouche raised repeatedly, which is the question of what do you think is the image of man? Are human beings animals just to be, you cull the herd like a bunch of cattle? You run society in an oligarchical model? Or are human beings created in the image of God, with each person? And that's frankly, it's a total miracle if you think about it. I guess we have about 8 billion people on the planet today, and even between identical twins, they're not completely identical. Every single human being is actually unique, which is quite miraculous. Leibniz used to discuss this. So it's like the life of a child is like a gift. You don't know what the potential is. And you want to create a society which allows the development of that potential to the absolute maximum, which is really, that was the breakthrough of the United States, to end the empire system, to end the system in Europe where everybody was stuck in this caste system, having to do what their father and grandfather did before, and you couldn't really get out of it. So this breakthrough conception from Nicholas of Cusa, the consent of the governed, was a real revolution, and our nation has to continue to uphold that. And what concerns me is that our nation has shifted somehow. Somewhere in the 1960s, LaRouche used to, and I guess it's all right if everyone knows how old I am, but LaRouche used to say that the year that everything turned bad was the year I was born, 1966. You know, it was after the Kennedy assassination, the Malcolm X assassination. You and Dennis Speed discussed this period of the 60s, and then later Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King. But you had a real loss of optimism, and I think a loss of identity, so that people, when they see the plight of children, whether it's Yemen, whether it's the children who are stuck at the border, there's not the compelling drive that something has to be done to stop this, and that it's not acceptable to treat any human being in that fashion, and that you don't have to go along with it. Of course, there is a solution. I think that's the other thing. People have come to believe that you can't solve it.
Well, there is the difficulty of what we call the system, or whatever you want to call it. And in other words, if you want to solve it, you need to have Congress. You know, the founding fathers created Congress to solve these problems. They didn't put it in the hands of corporations or gurus or foundations or anybody else. They put it in the hands of Congress. But of course, the people with the money and the motives know that, and their first resort is to try to control a seat in Congress. None of them could possibly be any more important than the Senate seat from New York. The senator, now known as the senator from Wall Street, is your opponent in the next election. You have thrown your hat in the ring, and tell us a little bit about that. How did you decide to take on such a challenge, and how's it going?
Well, it's an interesting campaign. Obviously, New York is a big state, so I have a lot of work to do. I wanted, you know, especially after Mr. LaRouche passed away, I think it's very important that there is a national platform for LaRouche's ideas. And one way to do that is federal campaigns. I had been part of a slate that LaRouche had asked to run. Actually, first there was a slate in 2010, then it was expanded in 2012, and there were 6 of us, slightly younger than myself, some of them associates of LaRouche, who ran for Congress in different states across the country. And the idea that he kept telling us was, you're not out there to become popular. You're not out there to chase after votes and propitiate people, but you're there to represent a presidential policy, a federal policy. And therefore, clearly, New York is a very important state. The senators from New York have always played a crucial role, and Schumer in particular, who has been in Washington now 40 years, it'll be 42 next year, who not only is the senator from Wall Street, but also, if you remember, early on when President Trump was talking about reorganizing the intelligence agencies, Schumer was on, I think it was Rachel Maddow, and he said, that's a really stupid thing to do. If you go after the intelligence agencies, they'll have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. And I just thought, you know, someone needs to really take this guy on. Does he know this from personal experience? Does he have skeletons in his closet that he's compromised on why he wants to defend them? Is it something else? So that was, so that's what I decided to do this. And I think it's been useful. The campaign clearly is just gearing up. There may be other LaRouche candidates around the country, but it's a great place to be. There's a lot going on in New York. I was at the terrible closing of Indian Point nuclear plant today. And this is a disaster, which I'm hoping can be reversed. But, you know, where is Schumer on this? Some of the people there said they like Schumer because he's helping them get new jobs. Why should they get new jobs? We should keep the plant open. We're going to have blackouts and brownouts in New York City this summer.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that. Where is the Indian Point?
It's in a little town called Buchanan, which is about 25 miles north of Manhattan. And there was a very nasty deal involving the Cuomo family and Riverkeeper. And I don't know the details of it. I'm going to find out more because someone today spoke quite angrily about it. The plant itself is in excellent shape. It probably could operate another 20 or 40 years. There were 2 reactors there that had been operational. One was closed last year. Before that one was closed, they supplied 25% of the energy for New York City. They closed one last year. They're closing this one. They have a gas-fired plant. I think it's called Cricket Point. That's replacing one of them. The other one, I'm not sure. Happily, there's a lot of environmentalists out there who are for nuclear power. I don't agree with them on carbon dioxide being a global warming gas, but they are correct that nuclear power is the cleanest, safest form of energy there is. And I was happy to even meet a group of young people supporting something called the Green Nuclear Deal. I'd be interested to find out more about that. I don't think they agree on our perspective, LaRouche's perspective, which is it is a natural thing for human beings to increase their energy consumption per capita in a hyperbolic way. That's part of growth. That's what gives us our high standard of living. And if you're going to send people back to burning wood, burning coal, or these god-awful windmills and solar panels, which take up millions of acres of land to get unreliable power, then what you're doing is you're condemning people to death. So this is a terrible day, and I'm hoping that we can jam up the decommissioning, because I know that there were nuclear plants up in Canada that had been closed for 7 years, and they were just able to get them reopened. So if they don't take everything apart, we may be able, after everyone suffers from the power shortages they're going to be experiencing in the new future, maybe they'll come back to their senses and we can get this plant back open.
Well, a number of your colleagues have pretty much convinced me of the same thing, and that is that the powers that be are systematically shutting down coal and nuclear in order to put the United States into a backward spiral as far as energy is concerned, and that would be a terrible thing for everyone. The difficulty is getting people to understand that, yeah, you really do need energy, and no, the windmills and the solar is not the answer. How can we get them to understand that? Well, it takes an educated person, and it also takes a willingness to bend the message into the sound bites that are required of today's media. People just don't have an attention span that is going to take the whole argument in anymore. So I guess we have to develop a way to convey this message that, hey, yeah, I always think of Homer Simpson of The Simpsons, when you think of a nuclear plant and the guy kicking back, eating donuts, and, suddenly some steam comes out of a pipe, and you start, oh my God, it's the Homer Simpson factor. And they got us all scared of nuclear power. But like everything else that they do, I think it's a psyop. I think they want us scared of it so that we don't get involved in producing it, get involved in understanding that it really is a very efficient form of power, at least a way to preserve it, a way to store it, and a way to use it that is highly efficient compared to anything that can be done with windmills. Tilting at windmills, the windmills of offshore New England. You've taken that cause on as well. Tell us about your work in that area.
Sure. Before we get to that, since we're talking about nuclear, I just want to say something, because people are afraid of the wrong thing. They're afraid of nuclear power. They are not afraid of nuclear war, which is looming. And I know you had Helga Zepp-LaRouche on, was it yesterday or the day before, who brought this up. But I really do want to take a minute tonight to make sure, because first of all, we're coming up on, I guess it's 1 week from this weekend is VE Day, the 76th anniversary of the surrender of the Nazis in Europe. And the Soviet Union, the Russian people, lost 27 million lives. I don't know if your viewers have taken, I spent some time this year or last year during the COVID lockdown. I think a lot of us probably took some time to watch documentaries, Shakespeare plays, things you wanted to catch up on. I watched the Burt Lancaster series, The Unknown War. I don't know if you've seen that. It's gut-wrenching when you realize what people went through. I mean, virtually every single family lost people in World War II. The Operation Barbarossa, which was launched in 1941, where there was just this onslaught north-south Arctic into the Soviet Union, and every single person was involved in this war because the Nazis said, since this is an inferior bloodline, if you take a village, you just have to exterminate everyone. So there's no point to surrender. And so you think about having that very, very personally in your memory, and then doing what was done by Obama and Biden in Ukraine, where you spend $5 billion. You have Victoria Nuland, who's coming back in as the political affairs director of the state secretary of political affairs, or whatever it's called, policy, number 3 at the State Department, handing out Twinkies to people who were throwing Molotov cocktails, setting police on fire, beating up parliamentarians with baseball bats. And that's called a nonviolent, peaceful demonstration and regime change. And not surprisingly, since people were being beaten up or burned alive for speaking Russian, Crimea voted overwhelmingly to leave Ukraine and go back to Russia. But what do we hear over here? Putin annexed Crimea. Or Biden, the White House put out a statement saying Crimea is Ukraine. Now, believe me, given the news media, if Putin had annexed Crimea and they didn't want to be part of Russia, there would be demonstrations. We would see these demonstrations all over the press. You don't see anything because they voted to leave this pro-Bandera regime in Ukraine and go back to Russia. But I want to bring this up because I think Americans are very largely unaware of what we are doing in this part of the world. It's as if we were poking our fingers in Putin's eyes and doing the same thing to Xi Jinping. And I just had pulled off before we start this press briefing from the first Deputy Permanent Representative, Dmitry Polyansky, given yesterday. And he said, the quote of the month, he said the Russian mission to the UN is going to start a new tradition. They're going to have a quote of the month. And he said the quote of the month is attributed to a famous Polish Jewish philosopher, Stanislaw Jerzy Lee. And he lived in the first half of the last century and said a very cute thing. We thought we had hit rock bottom, and then someone knocked from below. That's kind of Russian humor also, I think, very dark. And so he said, there's a tweet from the State Department spokesman, Ned Price, saying, quote, "We are sending a clear message to Moscow. We are holding you to account for your role in the solar winds intrusion, the reports of bounties on U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan. Remember that was already debunked, and attempts to interfere in the 2020 U.S. elections." Now, they never proved that Russia interfered in the 2016 elections. And therefore, we're putting absolutely as devastating sanctions on Russia as we possibly can, and going right up to their borders. And now Putin said in a press conference that the FSB has evidence that one of Biden's top advisors, Michael Carpenter, was involved in an assassination attempt against President Lukashenko of Belarus. I mean, can you imagine? And someone had said it would be like assassinating the Prime Minister of Canada or something. But Belarus is part of the Russian Federation. It's a little bit different. I mean, it's extremely close. So this puts us in a very, very dangerous situation. And I think most people are not even aware, although some have been rather outspoken, Tulsi Gabbard, Caitlin Johnstone, others. But this is why the Schiller Institute is holding a conference on May 8th, which happens to be over that time of VE Day, partly to deal with this very dangerous strategic situation. That's the first half in the morning. The second half in the afternoon will be dealing with exactly what we were talking at the beginning, the food crisis, the famine, the pandemic, and how you actually act to lift the world out of poverty and out of conditions where you have pandemics, which is also a good war avoidance strategy.
Well, yeah, if you have the willingness, this is the problem. We have people like Chuck Schumer that just don't have the willingness to lift the world out of the poverty problem. It's all part of the same big problem we've been facing for my entire life. The powers that be have gotten themselves consolidated in such a way that they can create scarcity where scarcity shouldn't even exist. People talk about diamonds as an example, that diamonds aren't really scarce. That just the source is completely controlled by De Beers, and so that's the artificial scarcity. Now they create artificial scarcity by killing off our food supply, by depriving us of fresh water, by poisoning our water, by doing all kinds of environmental terrible things. I see this happening as part of the ongoing, demoralization of the United States, to create a kind of a pessimism in this country that folks in your organization have been talking about for years. I was watching Jeffrey Steinberg today in a presentation from 1993 in which he was talking about the very same thing, and in no uncertain terms, going right after folks like the ADL, for instance, and the Federal Reserve, and also speaking about an organization that's not spoken of much, but I think has a lot more power than people really admit, and that is the Southern jurisdiction of Scottish Rite Freemasonry that was a focus of his talk that day. And how there are secret societies, and JFK is right that we cannot. It's the very idea of secret societies is incompatible with democratic institutions. Yet these secret things go on behind the scenes all the time, and it's very difficult for us to maintain the sense that our system is working. In many ways, it's not working. It's not working for poor children in so many states of everywhere. You can find pockets of poverty, if not whole counties full of poverty in places, West Virginia, Kentucky, and I'm sure there's plenty others that I could name. How do you get people to move on these issues? How do you get people to change? You said at the beginning, that there's a kind of a malaise, a kind of an acceptance of, well, yeah, children are going to suffer, and that's been going on a long time, and like there will always be the poor, some people might say from the Bible. Well, I don't think it's necessary that we have suffering children, and I know you don't either. Where can we go from here? I'd like to nail 95 Theses on Chuck Schumer's door and say, come on, dude, just read this stuff and let's start acting like human beings. But
well, I don't think he's gonna.
What can we do?
I don't know if he'll respond. He strikes me. I just have this sense from him of a very dull, venal person. There's not anything brilliant about Chuck Schumer. He's loyal to certain rotten interests, and whatever existed of a conscience in him has been suppressed, so he doesn't think about it anymore. But we have, it's very ironic, because we actually, in our last conference, we had speakers from Iraq and Syria. Now, Iraq in particular, Syria's been getting bombed and destroyed for 10 years. Iraq has been getting bombed for 30 years. And the children and young people in Iraq are more optimistic than young people in the United States. And I think you have to think about that, because I think that pessimism actually comes from giving up. That is, you give up first and then you become pessimistic. It's not because you meet an insurmountable object and then you say, oh, I don't think I can solve this, and then you get pessimistic. It's when you say, I'm not going to fight anymore. And then when you see that ugliness in yourself, it makes you pessimistic, because you see that you yourself have become less than what you wanted to be or thought you should be. And that brings me to a point that I really wanted to raise. You know, the what Esau and Jacob, I guess it is, selling your birthright for a bowl of pottage. I keep running across this where it happened with this. You brought up the windmills off the coast of Long Island and so on. So I ran into someone who said, you know, you really shouldn't attack these wind turbine plans. And I said, well, they're terrible. And he said, yeah, but they're not going to kill all the fish. And I said, well, maybe they are, maybe they're not. I don't know. It sounds like they're pretty bad, but they don't produce any energy. And he said, I know. And then he said, and I know in the summer when you need the most energy, the wind doesn't blow. So we're not going to get any electricity, but we really have to build these wind turbines because there's a whole bunch of people who operate tour boats and they've had no business and no work, and they're all going to get good paying jobs building these wind turbines. Now that's what I call selling your birthright for a bowl of pottage, because people have decided that they're so desperate that they're going to scratch in the dirt. They're going to grab for this one job that'll last for 2 years to get by. And when they're done with it, they're going to be living in a third world country because they're not going to have any electricity, rather than fighting for what the nation actually requires. And you see people fighting on really silly things, like whether or not, and forgive me, I may offend some people on your show, but whether or not wearing a face mask is a violation of human rights. You realize if you have one of these, a smartphone, that anywhere you go, they know everything about you. Everything I say right now is being picked. I mean, it's public anyway, but you know, if you say I have a backache, the next thing you know, you're going to get 20 ads on your smartphone. That is a real violation. But I think we say, well, we can't really fight that. So we're going to be in a complete rage about whether we have to wear a face mask or not, as opposed to the really big things. It reminds me when I took my dog to Central Park, and I have a dog who is terribly dog aggressive, and you can't take him around other dogs. So I was curious to see how he'd act when he saw a horse. You know, they have the horses. So we went by the horses, like nothing, completely ignored it, didn't want to see it. And I think that's what makes people pessimistic. You have a gigantic problem right in front of you, and you decide that you can't solve it, but you're going to obsess about some minor thing, or even some personal short-term survival, as opposed to saying, no, we should have a great nation, a good nation. We need about 43,000 miles of high-speed rail, water management. Why do we have floods and forest fires? This is like going back to caveman times. We should be beyond all of that.
Well, I don't think anyone is offended by the idea that that you said about face masks, but I think that a lot of people disagree with your assessment of the importance of the face mask debate. And while you would say it's a minor thing that shouldn't be focused upon, a lot of people would say it's a major thing that needs to be focused upon. And that's one of those things that I guess it can be a wedge issue that divides people that otherwise wouldn't be divided. It's an unfortunate situation. I would love to see everyone agree as to when and where and why we should wear these masks. I don't think that conversation's been had. I don't think that there is sufficient scientific justification one way or the other, or I just haven't seen sufficient explanation of any of it. So it's an unfortunate thing, but it's not a minor thing to those people who object to wearing face masks. It goes right directly to the freedoms that we see in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So yeah, and I think those things change in different parts of the country too, where you have an area where people are not likely to get sick due to the weather. It's just not conducive to the virus. Whereas people are living in places where the virus can be much more easily transmitted. People can achieve a different consensus of saying, yeah, we should wear them. But places where the incidence of it is low, and the politicians are pressured by the people to say, no, we don't want to do that. You know, I as far as I can see, the Constitution leaves that to the states and not to the federal government. So, you know, again, it may be an issue that we can spin our wheels on and not get anywhere, and that's unfortunate. So I respect the positions of everyone on these things, and we all just have to make our own choices when it comes right down to it. If we're not allowed to make our own choices, then have we not been deprived of that very faculty of reason, which is the essence of humanity?
Well, I think we have to know when we're making our own choices, and that's a very hard thing because of the social media and so on. And I think, unfortunately, we've become very unscientific, and there was so much disinformation and arbitrariness about everything from the beginning of this. But if you take it from the standpoint that LaRouche warned in the 70s of new pandemics, this question of potential population density or energy flux density, if you have a society which has electricity, clean drinking water, adequate nutrition, a very high standard of living, and you can sustain a large number of people per square mile because you use your resources very efficiently, and then suddenly you get rid of electricity, what that means is you've lowered the carrying capacity. And he warned that the policies of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, of reducing the standard of living was going to create conditions where you would have new pandemics. Because what I think hopefully people still understand is if you have bad nutrition, lack of sleep, high stress, overcrowding, you're going to be susceptible to disease. And that, I think, is the worst thing about this, is not merely the question of the vaccine, which I think is very important, and I'm glad we got this breakthrough. But if we don't want to have more pandemics, we have to have a commitment. Well, there's a map of population density. I have to say, for the cities, I once did an extrapolation. New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the United States, just for fun. 1,200 people per square mile. Do you know what the population of the United States would be if the whole country had that same population density?
No.
4.6 billion.
All right. And,
So
they think the Earth is overcrowded.
I know, no,
nonsense.
it's really fun, and they
There's
could all
plenty
have,
of room.
but they'd all have to have running water and electricity, and of course that's what. And doesn't that make you optimistic? I mean, imagine being 6 years old today and being told that you're destroying the world because you're exhaling and producing carbon dioxide.
It's disgusting. It's horrible. And there's where we have a complete agreement, is that doing this to little kids is awful. You know, for instance, the mask thing. I've seen, you know, people justifiably in tears speaking to their local councils about how, you know, these are children and there's no incidence of this disease hurting children. None. There's no evidence of it. At least that's, you know, that's what they say. That's what their medical sources say. Do you have sources that say that that children do get hurt by this disease?
They do. Not. It's very, very much rarer that children get very sick, but some of them get very, very sick. Some of them do get very, very sick.
Well,
It's just, but
some of them
what
get
I'm
very
saying
sick
is
from many things. Yeah.
you have to take a rigorous approach. I mean, if you look at certain things they did in China would not work here, like some of the very strict quarantine and lockdown, but they actually did get rid of it. And if
It
you look,
worked.
it worked for sure.
Yeah.
They're open and their economy is growing. And if you look at their schools, I saw someone sent some videos to how they reopened the schools, and they had really creative ways to keep the distancing between children. They made like paper mache wings, and every child wore these wings on their back. So you just physically, you could not get really close to each other. And you see them all sitting in the classroom with their masks and their wings, and they didn't look terribly oppressed. I mean, they have a very optimistic view. If you've seen the standard of living improve dramatically in your lifetime, then you have an idea that your children are going to be far better off than you are. And that makes people happy. I think most people would like their children to live very well and to be, to have a better life than they did.
Why does this have to be a grassroots project? Why isn't our government already carrying this banner and saying, we're going to improve the lives of our children, and we're going to take care of our disabled and our elderly, and we're going to solve all the problems that were addressed, by Roosevelt and his 4 freedoms. We're going to give the 4 freedoms to the people. It's time. We've got to stop supporting all these wars all over the place. And that's part of what you're saying too, is to, don't be afraid of Russia. Don't be afraid of China. They're not the threat. Well, what is the threat, Diane?
Well, to go back to this outlook of what it means to be human, and the loss of the identity of the United States. And I do want to go to one of these slides, the slide of the British Empire, if you can pull that up, because when we had the American Revolution, the British were running a large chunk of the planet. And you've heard the expression, the sun never sets on the British Empire. And I used to have a friend that said, thank God the sun never sets on the British Empire, because you sure can't trust them in the dark.
Yeah.
But you look at this, and then you think of the idea of our republic, that we said that there are certain this is the British East India Company, that picture. Starvation, probably 80 million people in India starved to death as a result of the British policy imposed on them. The Irish potato famine, that was of course after the American Revolution, but this hideous outlook. So you think about, we say no, there's inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the just consent of the governed. That is, that because human beings are created equal, that what determines if someone is qualified to rule is that the population agrees, in a sense, to give that's representative government. What does that mean? You say, I agree that I will trust you to represent me in policy direction. I'm consenting to that, which is why, on another topic, it's so important that we have fair elections. But and what's the point? That you want to nourish and protect this spark of creativity. Notice it doesn't say life, liberty, and property. It's pursuit of happiness. And when you think of what makes people really happy, profoundly happy, it's when you know that something you did was meaningful, that you made a lasting contribution, that your work was not in vain. It's not just that we all like to be appreciated, but you really want to know you did something, because we're not really here for that long. So in a sense, it's a right for people to be immortal, a right to make a contribution to all mankind, which gives you a profound sense of happiness. So what did we prove? After 100 years in the United States, we had the Centennial Exposition. There was the War of the Insurrection, where the British came in and tried to, created the Confederacy and tried to make us be a slaveholding, backwards cotton and tobacco producing entity. Abraham Lincoln was building the Transcontinental Railroad in the middle of that, which is amazing, and was assassinated. But nonetheless, in 1876, we had this incredible exposition in Philadelphia, where people came in from all around the world. We were the #1 productive nation on the planet. This upstart with this novel idea about consent of the governed. And I think the great fear of the British was the obvious thing. If you can show that map of the Americas there, the obvious thing would be, especially since Europe was up and down and we weren't always able to trade with everyone, that we develop all of Central and South America. I mean, that would just make sense. You could have a bulwark of the Americas against British, Spanish, French, Dutch, against the colonial oligarchical approach. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately because of the situation on the border. How did it come to this, and how would you solve it? What makes people want to leave their countries? Well, it certainly doesn't help if you're running fast and furious and shipping drugs and guns down and, supporting drug cartels, which are killing people. That these are the kind of things that make people want to flee. But if you had this program, which people fought for, particularly Presidents Garfield and McKinley, both of whom were assassinated, but they were trying to have a Pan-American conference, a Pan-American railroad, and develop sovereign republics throughout South America. And imagine the total mortal terror of the British Empire of thinking of that area of land all the way from the northern part of Canada down to Argentina, what that would mean in the world. So it was sabotaged by those assassinations and then by policy later. And in the 60s, you had a terrible cultural paradigm shift. People have heard of the rock, drug, sex counterculture, or MK Ultra, where the CIA was introducing drugs on the college campuses. The Beatles were an operation, and Harley knows this very well. I was actually one of his articles where I learned that the first crowds that were screaming for the Beatles when they came over were paid. It was a total setup to get people to degrade themselves and to become bestialized, until finally, and I think I did have that slide, I wasn't sure I was going to use it, but Theodore Adorno, who was part of this Congress for Cultural Freedom in Hollywood, who hated Beethoven with a passion. You've heard the line that genius and insanity are very close. That's another line. If you're a genius, you're probably insane. What a disgusting idea. Well, Adorno said that what you want to do with rock music and the top 40 is you want to get people to disassociate themselves from reality. They should be out of reality. They should be disassociated from their own body. And he said, finally, the fourth phase of modern music is necrophilia. That's the aim of pop music. So think about that. Think about the mentality of the Enron traders when they, you remember those tapes? They were gloating about Granny not being able to pay her electric bill and so on.
I don't remember that. That was a while back, but there's the idea is fresh in the mind. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, it was very sicko. There he is, Adorno. No, just hatred, real evil. It's so evil. It almost, when you inhale, you feel like it's going to singe your nostrils. This sadistic pleasure in causing the suffering of other people.
I think you just defined Alan Dulles.
Oh, yeah, that too.
Yeah.
Wasn't he part of that? Well,
yeah, of course he was. He was the guy that was on top of Wisner, Helms, and Bissell running MK Ultra. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So they spent a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort in trying to make us pessimistic. And
Word.
perhaps, well, maybe one of the most revolutionary things we can do is to not be pessimistic.
Well, that's what I like about you guys, because you don't accept an unhappy answer. That's one of my experiences with Harley. Is he's always going to be an optimist about things, and ultimately, I think it's true that as much as the struggle for freedom is, that it's inevitable that one day, we shall overcome, if you want to put it that way. And I want to be part of it. I want to be part of everybody that's making progress against this oligarchy that has imposed itself on us through the tentacles of a Chuck Schumer and so many other of the people, the characters that are imposed upon us in the Congress, where they do get the power from. One of my biggest pet peeves is the idea that corporations somehow can exist beyond the power of the government that created them. It's ridiculous. A corporation is a piece of paper. A piece of paper is signed by some people, and the government says, okay, we're going to approve this corporation for whatever its purposes are. Boom, stamp. But the government should be able to just pull that right back. They mess up, well, goodbye. No, that's no longer the case. The corporations now are telling the government what to do. And that's where the Great Reset, I think, comes in. And that's where these things come together. And Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forums wrote a book at the beginning of the COVID crisis called COVID-19, The Great Reset.
Right.
And this is where the suspicion, I think, should be evident to everyone about the COVID, is the incredible timing. That how did he know to write that book? How did he and you know what? That book had to be on the shelf, waiting for, this is the opportunity, should we launch it now? Well, here comes, let's do this. And then everybody will be locked down. Everybody's locked down. Guess what? You don't drive your car so much. You don't need as much gas as you used to need. So the production of the gas goes down. People use less energy generally. So we don't really need that Indian River nuclear plant anymore because people are using less energy. Well, then by the time that you let people out of the lockdown and let them go back to their jobs in real bricks and mortars and commute to Manhattan again and do the old, well, that's not going to happen. You're not going to be going back to work. You're not going to be doing that because no longer will you have enough energy to run the transportation system to get you to those jobs. You will no longer be having that option. And by the way, if you want to drive your car, there's going to be a surtax on that. Anybody who wants to cross a state line is going to have to, the scanners will get your tag number and send you a bill. This is coming. They're taking over everything that has to do with energy in the name of Earth, saving the planet. And maybe we should talk about Earth Day and the foundation of Earth Day by these people that really are eugenicists. They were using the cover story of Earth, of protecting the Earth, as a way to pursue their agenda, their eugenic agenda that we've explored pretty deeply here on this channel, from the Malthus and Galton and Cold Spring Harbor, the Harrimans and all of the Rockefellers, Pilgrim Society, everything that connects right back to the British Empire. That's real. The fear that somebody might unleash a bioweapon that would be intended to reduce population, that's a real fear. And that to me is enough to think, maybe those guys over there at the World Economic Forum could have said, to somebody in some lab, why don't you knock that vial over and leave the door open?
Well, I think it's interesting because we could have taken the pandemic as an opportunity and said, oh my goodness, look, our supply lines are a disaster. Our schools are a disaster. If you're outdoors working, the risk is much less. than sitting in an office somewhere. So maybe what we should do is take all these poor people who are working at tattoo parlors, massage therapists, and everything else, and retrain them to have a crash program to build the infrastructure that we need and rebuild our health. And you could have turned a disaster into something that propelled a total shift of the US economy. And when you look at what China did, and I'm sure you followed, I mean, they were building these 1,000-bed hospitals in 10 days. And, they met it as a challenge. They thought it was a great victory if you saved the life of someone who was 103 years old who had Alzheimer's, where in the United States you had, it was someone down in Texas, I forget who was the mayor of something, who said, oh no, I want my children to have a future, so I don't mind dying keeping my store open. So you're in effect saying, look, if we have to let all the elderly die off in order to somehow save the economy, I mean, what a warped view. Americans used to have the idea that you come across a problem and you solve it. You figure out how to solve it and you do it. And that, of course, makes one optimistic.
Yeah, and everybody wants to be part of solving this problem, and the obscurity of information has been horrific, and that's the whole story. Is why isn't there contact tracing going back to who is working on the question of who is patient number one? Anybody working on that problem? Nobody is. It's like they don't care. The scientific method is out the window. They don't care about science. They just want to get everybody into a big panic. And that's why I associate the COVID-19, the Great Reset and COVID-19 as one big project by the World Economic Forum and other allied things like the Bilderbergers and CFR and all of these creepy organizations that really shouldn't exist at all, in my opinion.
Well, luckily, they're completely bankrupt. I think that may be their biggest fear. I mean, that's why they have to do this, really, is because the bubble. I mean, what is the stock market now? 30-something thousand, which is absurd. And you may have seen that. I know we just have a few minutes left, that triple curve function of LaRouche, where it goes hyperbolically up and the other one goes hyperbolically down. We're literally...
Let's pull that one up, Andy. There's a chart there among her slides. I think it's very useful.
That's great, because it is actually the case that the amount of stock market, the money that you're putting into inflating this thing, like all of these crazy bailouts and relief packages, there it is. So the point about the left side is that this is one function. It's not three functions. And until about 1966, when you had physical investments and improvements, the stock market went up, because the stock market used to be connected to our real productivity. Once Nixon took the dollar off gold, Glass-Steagall was repealed, derivatives were deregulated, etc., suddenly you got a situation where you could bet, like you could bet that Trans World Airlines was going to go bankrupt, and you would make a lot of money even though the company itself went out of existence. So we came to a point where literally the higher the stock market went, the worse the economy was, the real economy. And we're now at that. We're at a shock front where it's going to blow. So that's our advantage. The question is, it's sort of a race against time. Are we going to get nuclear war? Are we going to get a disintegration of everything? Or can we somehow pull people together to come to their senses? And we do have, I mean, China, Russia, India, there's some pretty big players who have a glimmer of what's going on. So it's up to the American people to get on top of it.
American people, wake up. American people, we need you, stat, turn
well,
off the television.
We got to get our trombones out. We got to get our trombones out. And
listen, God's trombones come back to earth, and we'll wake everybody up, and maybe also shake up the walls of Congress a little bit, because they definitely need to be shaken up. Diane Sare, good luck with your campaign. I want you to win this. The mass debate will be behind us one day, we hope. but the question of fundamental humanity is what's at stake here. And if we lose if we totally lose control of our government to these oligarchs, the World Economic Forum and the creepy societies that I've been referencing, and it have been studied in depth by your organization, and my hats off to you for the great work of people like Jeff Steinberg and Anton Chaikin, so many people, Harley Schlanger, of course, too many to mention. It's a completely amazing resource, the Executive Intelligence Review that you can see on LaRouchePub.com, right? And LaRoucheOrganization.com, where you'll see Harley Schlanger every morning with a morning report from Harley himself. Diane, I really do appreciate your being with us tonight. The idea, I'm sorry, Andy is giving me a note.
The conference.
And he wants to make sure that we talk about the conference, and let's leave everyone with that. So tell us a little bit more about the conference, and we'll close out the show.
Great, thanks. Well, again, it is the anniversary of VE Day, appropriately enough, when the world said never again. So it's Saturday, May 8th, and this is at schillerinstitute.com. You can register. I would really encourage everybody to participate, and there are questions and answers, and I know there's going to be some very high-level speakers from around the world, including Mrs. LaRouche, of course, but representatives of different nations that are involved in this. And the morning panel from 9 until noon is on the global strategic crisis, this war danger. And then the afternoon panel from 1 until 4 is taking up what Dennis Speed has been working on, in particular, the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites, uniting the food producers and the people suffering the famine and the poverty, including emphatically our own farmers. So it's going to be it's a day that might even make people optimistic if they participate.
Okay, well, I certainly plan to participate, and I encourage everyone else to do so as well. We need to take the solutions that are offered to us and run with them and make them better. Don't sit on the sidelines. It's too important. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Diane, and best of luck. I'm rooting for you. We want you. We want you and the Statue of Liberty and all the freedoms of our Constitution. Thanks, Diane.
Well, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.